So this via, we are exploring how we give birth to the creative light of love in the world by being willing to change, by becoming aware of the world in new and deeper ways, recognizing our spiritual growth as the head knowledge that we have becomes heart knowing, and then we embody that light in the world. And we're exploring this fourfold path all during this via. The word recognize, it comes from the Latin re, which means again, and cognoscere, which means to get to know. So when we recognize something, we're simply recalling what we already know. We're getting to know something, someone, or some concept again, implying that we knew this before, but we may have forgotten. For example, once we knew that we were the light of the world, forever joined in infinite union with our Creator. But as A Course in Miracles says, this tiny, mad idea of separation entered our consciousness, and we took this cosmic joke of separation seriously, so seriously that we forgot to laugh. And what spun off from our not seeing how laughable it is that we could ever be separate from God, it has created this illusory world of form, where we believe with all of our heart and our mind and our soul that we are separate from one another and separate from God. However, there is something maybe even deep within us that just knows this world we see can't be all that there is. There has got to be something more. There's got to be something better, something more peaceful and loving that we are meant to be part of. And if we are willing to be open to finding that something more, and we become aware of the clues of our inner divinity that God lays out in this world for us to see, then jubilants, we will finally recognize the truth about ourselves. And it is in this recognition that brings our awareness of our divinity from head knowledge into a heart knowing, a place where there is no question about who we truly are. We are beloved children of God who have never been separated from our Creator. So I invite you, jubilants, in this moment to know again who you truly are, because when you finally recognize yourself in everyone around you, that's when you'll say, oh yeah. Back in the 1990s, I spent a lot of time on the internet. I still do, of course. But back then, I spent the majority of my time arguing with other people online, which is not what I do a lot of right now. Back then, of course, there was no Facebook. Can you imagine? Just give yourself a minute with that. What? There was no Facebook. It was nice. Bob's like, it was nice back then. But there were Yahoo message boards, right? And the communities that I frequented on those Yahoo message boards attracted a lot of arguments about whether or not you could be both a Christian and a lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender person. The resounding answer from those who believed in an inerrant Bible and that condemning old man in the sky kind of God was no. And they marshaled all their evidence from literal readings of 6 or 7 Bible passages, along with a healthy dose of homophobia and misogyny that their faith had steeped them in for centuries. Perhaps, though, I'm being a little bit too harsh on them, maybe. I see now, of course, that they were simply beloved children of God who were just captured by their egoic fear, a fear that was based mostly on being wrong about their beliefs and winding up in an eternal hell, right? It's a familiar fear. But in that moment, though, they were the people who were wrong on the internet, and it was my job, by God, to change their hearts and minds. By God. Damn it. You're wrong. So I tried to use my extensive knowledge of what the Bible says in context about homosexuality and my firsthand experience as a lesbian, I had some experience in this, to try to persuade them. When that inevitably did not work, I resorted to sarcasm, name-calling, tit-for-tat condemnation. It was great. Most interactions turned nasty pretty quickly back in those days. And the upshot of all the arguing is that God does indeed love LGBTQ people, even those who claim Christianity as their faith. But he, and make no mistake, God's pronouns are he and him, according to these folks. God hated their behavior. Love the sinner, hate the sin. Of course, that behavior was boiled down to whatever two people did in bed, and any talk of loving same-gender couples, whatever love they may share, well, that was a side issue at best. Their prescription, my internet detractors, was to get back into God's good graces by changing. Renouncing that thing that makes Jesus puke. If I changed, my accusers promised I would be cured. And you know what? I changed. And I was cured. But I didn't seek to change my sexual orientation, obviously. Instead, I changed how I saw God. I changed how I related to that creative force in the universe. And this was almost as revolutionary as giving up my sexual orientation, because my Southern Baptist tradition taught me to fear God, or else I would be cursed at best, smited at worst, and sent to an eternal hellfire. My tradition portrays God as a strict, humorless rule keeper, a harsh taskmaster, and a hater of long hair on men and pants on women. Strange God, that one. Fashion God, you know. No. Fashionista. When I became willing to see God differently than my tradition had taught me, I became aware of what a silly little God he turned out to be. That led me to recognize all the other ways that God is imagined or thought about through the different religions and philosophies and spiritual masters, such as the mystics, who always portray God as playful, sensual, sometimes even erotic, scandalous. My Southern Baptist mama is rolling in her grave. Overall, though, these mystics, these metaphysicians, they consistently convey God as an entity that delights in us, which is completely opposite than the God I grew up believing in. Not only that, all these mystics, they are certain that we remain one with the holy no matter how fiercely we believe in our separation. Like that Catholic theologian, Thomas Aquinas, in today's reading, sometimes, he says, we think that what we are saying about God is true, and in fact it is not. It would seem of value to differentiate between what is God's nature and what is false about love. He then proceeds to tell us what he has come to learn, that the truth never harms or frightens, that God's compassion and light can never be limited. That knowledge led him to conclude this: any God who could condemn is not a God at all, but some disturbing image in the mind of a child we best ignore until we can cure the dark. Now, what brought a theologian like Aquinas to that kind of a conclusion? It's that third step in our fourfold path to enlightenment. It's recognition. We've already talked about that first step, which is our willingness to see a better way to live than being jerked around by our ego's compulsiveness and competitiveness. We've also talked about that second step of awareness, where we begin to see the clues and the hints and the paths to live in that better way that leads us out of that ego and into that higher divine self. And this third step of recognition, it is the most important one, because it is here that we gather that new knowledge that we're willing and able to become aware of, and we allow that knowledge to travel from our head to our heart, where it becomes a doubtless knowing. This is what happened to Aquinas. It's what happened to all the mystics, from Rumi, Hafez, Meister Eckhart, Julian of Norwich, Catherine of Siena, countless others, including the scribes and editors of the New Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, A Course in Miracles, and any other wise and holy scripture. down through the ages. Recognition, according to A Course in Miracles, simply means to know again. In this state, we become so open and so hungry for Spirit to show us that better way to live that we begin to transcend that static ego state and become in that ecstatic, higher divine state where we're open to miracles, where we're open to our perception to be changed. The miracle, of course, says being a way of perceiving is not knowledge. It is the right answer to a question, but you do not question when you know. When you know, when you recognize the truth about yourself, that you have always known it, you have always known that you are an innocent, beloved child of God and nothing else. And when that really sinks in, you do not question it. You just know it. And the only reason I ever argued with any of my internet inquisitors was because I had not yet realized and recognized the truth about myself. That while my sexual orientation may be part of my learning curriculum in this life, it is not who I am. I am the light of the world. I am the one child of God, and so is everyone in this room and out there. Jubilants, once I saw love, I came to learn, as Aquinas did, that the truth never harms or frightens, and that God's compassion and light can never be limited, and any God who could condemn is not a God at all, but some disturbing image in the mind of a child we best ignore until we can cure the dark. And how do we cure the dark? Yes, Arlo, you got it right. We bring it to the light of love. Breathe deeply. Once upon a time, according to an old Hindu legend, all human beings were gods. But they so abused that power that Brahma, the top god, took away their divinity and was looking for a place to hide it so they could never, ever, ever find it again. So Brahma consulted with all the other gods who suggested, hide it deep within the earth. Hide it in the depths of the ocean. Hide it on the highest mountaintop. But Brahma knew that we, obstreperous humans, would dig or dive deep or climb the highest peak in search of it. So finally, after much contemplation, Brahma hit on the perfect plan. Brahma said, we will hide their divinity deep down in the one place they surely will never, ever look. At the very center of their being. This is an ingenious plan, because our ego loves to have us running around in circles, looking for what we think is our divinity outside of us, when love is just waiting to be recognized and discovered within that movement from head to heart. And those men who traveled with Jesus on that road to Emmaus after his resurrection, they didn't recognize him until he sat down at the table and broke bread with them. So metaphysically speaking, this is the moment they discovered not just a divine being in front of them, but their divinity within. Why? Because the key to recognition is communion. The moment we can see our unity within every living creature that our ego swears we are separated from, we will remember who we are and who they are too. That communion, it doesn't even have to be an enjoyable encounter with others for it to nourish us and give us the miracle we need to recognize that unity. My internet detractors, I broke bread with them a lot, metaphysically, metaphorically. We often communed, but we were sort of like that estranged family on Thanksgiving, sort of yelling past one another. But what I finally realized, though, was that these guys on the internet were making me stronger. They were pushing me to learn more and more, not just about homosexuality in the Bible, but about myself. To learn about that higher divine self that I possess that doesn't even have a sexual orientation, much less a gender. And that was my realization, Jubilants. I realized arguing over sexual orientation and religion is ridiculous. It's all made up. Gender, religion, sex, doctrines, dogmas. We made it all up. It's not even real. And we're going to spend our lives arguing about it? Are you insane? Yes, because it's the ego. You are insane. Absolutely. There's no literal heaven. There's no literal hell. There's no punishing God to fear. It's all just the illusion we made up. When the head knowledge becomes a heart knowing, it just made me laugh. I mean, how ridiculous this entire exercise has been. I've dedicated half of my life to arguing about something that's imaginary. Trying to reconcile two imaginary things and believing that my very soul, my very eternal fate depended on me succeeding. It's funny. This is what we forgot to laugh at, Jubilants. How funny that is. That's hysterical. This is the best stand-up routine you have ever seen. What that experience taught me is what today's course reading says. All of your difficulties stem from the fact that you do not recognize yourself, your siblings, or God. When I began to question the illusion, Jubilants, my eyes were opened. All that arguing, simply the ego's way to increase my feelings of separation from those who opposed me and my feelings of being separated from God. And I spent all those years arguing when I could have just saved a lot of time and recognized, as a course says, how you perceive at any given time determines what you do, and actions must occur in time. Knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. You know when you have ceased to ask questions. You know when you're not asking questions anymore. And Jubilants, today, I have no questions about homosexuality in the Bible. I know my sexual orientation, while it's part of the illusion, it's important only because it's a way that the Spirit teaches me who I truly am. I am the light of the world. I am a beloved child of God who still remains in unity with my Creator. Everything in our lives that we see as difficulties, they are tools that the Spirit is using to wake us up, to help us recognize that the joy and the peace and the love that we go out into this world and desperately search for is here. Brahma buried it deep in the center of us. Stop looking for it out there. It's not there. Recognize it here. So I invite you this morning, let's break some bread with Jesus. That older sibling who seeks to commune with us in every moment so we can recognize that higher divine self and extend that holy love out into the world in communion with everyone around us. And when those guys who were traveling with Jesus finally recognized him, they started talking to each other going, you know what? All that time our hearts were burning within us. We just knew there was something about this guy. Jesus awakened something in them, even before they recognized their own divinity. And that's what he can still do for us now when you are willing, Jubilants, to stop pledging allegiance to the ego's schemes and plans that will never satisfy you, and you become aware of a whole new world that can unfold for you when you invest in that higher divine self. Then you begin to recognize the unity of spirit we share with one another, even those you would rather not share your unity with. When I recognized the nourishment that my online detractors had given me, I went on that Yahoo message board and I wrote them a thank you note. I thanked them for having that communion with me. I told them that the arguments we shared had pushed me to learn and grow in ways that I had never imagined. And because of them, I had recognized God in a whole new, life-giving way. That recognition, I told them, it settled every question I had about the topic of spirituality and homosexuality, and that I would remain, quite happily, a lesbian in this existence, knowing that full well it's part of God's plan for my life. They were not thrilled. No, none of them went, oh, cool, no. They just continued to hurl insults and vitriol and condemning me to hell. It was great. However, my deepest hope is that through their encounter with me, on some level of consciousness, they too were blessed. And they will eventually find the treasure of their own divinity hidden underneath their egoic need to condemn others and have their views be seen as right in the world. Jubilants, when we recognize that love has been buried within us this entire time, while we frantically searched and searched for it outside of ourselves, we're going to feel like we have arrived in a brand new place. But that place is also going to feel familiar, because the recognition of our holiness is simply a remembering. It is a knowing again, without question, that we have possessed it all along.